My name is not Pepe the Frog. On the other hand, he'll be joining me in a bit, and then we will be Pepe the Frog, I guess. We did that last year or something. So yeah, there's precedent for that. Anyway, tonight I'm going to do something different. Usually I get up here and play music, but some of you might know I'm a writer, and a lot of people have gotten up here and done poetry and stuff like that, so I'm going to do what I do. I'm going to read from a novella that I've written. It's a sci-fi story. And if you want, I can give you information to read the rest of it online, but I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. And then I'm going to read a story sort of from the glory days. And one of these is true, and the other is alternate facts. You can figure out which is which. All right. So this is from my novella. It's titled Fireborn Maiden. And before I start reading this, I should mention, most of you probably know this, but the word Eyrie, A-E-R-I-E, that means an eagle's nest, or a nest for any predatory bird. Just so you know, I'm not saying Erie, E-E-R-I-E. Anyway, okay, so here we go. Fireborn Maiden. In the small dining hall just off the King's Eyrie, as the soup bowls were being cleared to make way for the roasted Yinyani breastbird, the great ancient King Zithram burst into a spell of inexplicable giggling. For Zithram's advisors and attendants, it was discomfiting, to say the least. The king never had been what anyone would call a mirthful person. Apart from the occasional snort or bark of derision, none of them could recall hearing the king really laugh. But now, suddenly, he's giggling like crazy for no reason that was apparent to anyone. The king's staff and ministers didn't know how to interpret this behavior, and it frightened them. Kalind felt frightened too, but out of instinct and long practice, she kept her fear well concealed. Seated far down the table from her uncle, she simply pretended that nothing odd was happening. It was the least she could do for the king. After all, he was the only family she knew. He could be harsh, and sometimes his actions seemed less than fair, but nevertheless, Kalind had grown to love the old king. They were bound by kinship and shared talents. And beyond that, day by day, he had conditioned her to love him, had tethered her to him. Their connection now felt visceral, almost complete. So while the decrepit old king giggled like a madman, Kalind did what she could do to help him. She cleared her throat and spoke up. "This bread seems stale, don't you think?" she asked no one in particular, plopping the crusty loaf into a woven bread basket. The three advisors seated at the king's table looked at each other and then at Kalind. Mission accomplished. She seized the bread basket and thrust it into the hands of the nearest server, a young man wearing a shabby-looking gold waistcoat and the same blue velvet cummerbund worn by all of the king's servants and maids. "Bring us some fresh bread, please. And also, the commerce minister's mug is empty, and so's mine. Do the cellars have any sweet mead?" she said. The servant nodded curtly and looked around the table to see if any other mugs needed refilling. He glanced at the king, who continued snickering to himself. The king's attendant, Pilosh, standing behind the king, shook his head, telling the server, "No, move on." To the king's right at the table, the secretary general, an overfilled tick of a man, nodded to the server and tapped the side of his goblet with a fork. "I'd have some mead if it's aged proper," he said through a mouthful of food. He chewed, swallowed, and added, "None of that young stuff. It gives me gas." The servant bowed, lifted the basket over his head, and rushed out of the room. After a few seconds, the king's giggling subsided. Suddenly, he croaked a question. "Where's the minstrel? That lazy pisspot had better get back in here, or I'll make him think he's an eagle." The king hooked his thumbs together and waggled his fingers like wings and broke into another fit of laughter. "He'll go out of the Eyrie like a fledgling. "I'll fetch the minstrel," said the attendant, moving toward the door. But just then the musician entered, carrying a Vocan pantar, a 24-stringed instrument shaped like a large wooden butterfly. The minstrel bowed before the king, saying, "Good evening, your highness." In turn, he bowed to each of the seated staffed members, and finally turned toward Kalind. He smiled, but didn't bow toward her. Would her grace care to request a tune for the king's enjoyment? Kalind hated this ritual. She'd make a suggestion per the ancient tradition of ladies' preference. Then the minstrel would seek the king's approval, which he never gave. Instead, Zithram would insult Kalind's choice and demand some obscure ditty that nobody had ever heard for 80 years. It had happened 100 times before. Kalind knew she couldn't win. She sighed and suggested the first song that popped into her head. "Let's hear the Fireborn Maiden," she said. The minstrel grinned knowingly and looked toward Zithram for his response. The king seemed to be chewing the inside of his cheek. After a moment, he looked up, and to Kalind's surprise, he smiled and began singing in a painfully flat croak. "Fireborn maiden, cry no more. Carry your burdens to the burning shore." He laughed. "A fine poem," he said. "Let the girl have it then. Let the lady have preference." Kalind sat stunned, staring into the fireplace as the minstrel began strumming. Moments later, the server returned, carrying a basket with a newly sliced loaf of bread and a carved wooden flagon. He set the bread basket on the table and smirked as he used the flagon to refill the king's goblet, ignoring the remonstrative gestures of Pilosh. Then he moved on to fill the Secretary General's cup and the Commerce Minister's. Finally, he came to Kalind, but she waved him off. The server rolled his eyes in annoyance, and she pretended not to notice. The minstrel was just finishing his tune when the king lurched up out of his seat, knocking his chair over backward in the process. He leaned on one elbow, bent against the table, and scrabbled for his walking stick, which had been resting under the arm of his chair. Pilosh picked it up and presented it to the king, who grabbed the stick out of the attendant's hands and used it to lever himself more or less upright. "Well, what are you all gawking at?" he demanded. He snorted in laughter and began giggling again. When he gained control of himself, he shouted, "I should make you walk straight into the boar's pen, ha-ha, and give yourself up for slop, hee-hee, every fire-damned one of you. And you," he turned on the server, who froze in position, holding the flagon of mead, you are a dog, hee-hee, fetch." The server dropped immediately to all fours. The pitcher crashed to the floor, breaking in two and splashing mead everywhere. The server adopted a dopey expression and began panting pathetically, while the king's staff members held their breath in terror. They all knew the server's fate could be theirs if their luck turned bad. Zithram stopped giggling and leveled a wicked grin at the server. "Dog, fetch the stick." The man barked a happy bark and shambled off toward the fireplace. He shoved his face directly into the blaze and chomped down on a burning log. He extracted his fiery prize and turned to look adoringly toward the king, oblivious as his lips and nose sizzled and cooked. Kalind screamed, and Zithram burst out in uproarious laughter. Suddenly, the server's expression changed from dopey to horrified. He dropped the burning firewood, howled in agony, and clambered away from the fire. Heedless in his panic, he slammed backwards into the minstrel, who lost control of the pantar. The instrument fell, bashing the server on the head and bursting apart in a cacophony of strings and percussion. The server fell unconscious at the minstrel's feet. For that temporary mercy, at least, Kalind felt grateful, but Zithram continued giggling until the giggle turned into a ragged cough, a deep, phlegmatic hacking that went on and on while everyone in the room kept silent. Thank you. Now I need my bass player. All right, so I call this In the Zone with Space Invaders. This is not science fiction, though, believe it or not. So when I was in middle school, I grew up in a town called Park Rapids, or spent middle school years in the Park Rapids. It's up in the North Woods. And we lived a couple of miles out of town, but some days after school, I wouldn't ride the bus home. Instead, I'd get on my skateboard and skate downtown and just skate around and go visit my mom, who was working at the clothing store that she owned downtown. I really like telling this story, actually, because it reminds me of my mom. She died 21 years ago, as of last month, I think. And, I think of her every day. She was a great lady. Nobody here has met her except for my wife, and it's too bad because she was a wonderful person. She was just gentle soul, very nice person. And every time I would come into the store, she would greet me with a smile and a hug. And even if she kind of wished I'd gone home on the bus instead of coming into town. But if I asked nice, she'd give me a couple of bucks so I could go down the street to the arcade and play some games and blow some money. So the arcade was a pretty cool place. I'd go there and hang out with my friends, and we'd drink pop and get some snacks and play games, of course. And they had, they have foosball, they had air hockey and pinball machines. I never really liked pinball very much. But they had this one game. It was a shooting game. And it was like actually shot a beam of light. And if you hit the target, it would flop down. Pretty cool. But at this time, I was really most interested in this newfangled thing called video games. You got to keep in mind now, this was late 70s, maybe 1980. It was before Pac-Man came out, if you can imagine that. I think they had Pong and Asteroids and Space Invaders. My favorite, actually, was Berserk. It was this game. It was like a really simple maze, and there were a bunch of robots in this maze shooting at you. And you had to try to get through the maze without getting shot by the robots. And the coolest thing about the game, really, is what the robots would say. And you might have heard this. It was, intruder alert, get the humanoid, get the intruder. It was awesome. Fun game. But sometimes I would play Asteroids or Space Invaders, and I wasn't ever very good at those games. But for some reason, one day, I got into the zone on Space Invaders. Usually, I could get through maybe 4 or 5 levels of Space Invaders before I'd die. But this day, I got to level 10. And if you know anything about Space Invaders, you know level 10 on Space Invaders is insane. I mean, the aliens are moving back and forth so fast, and they're just hailing you with bombs. It's crazy, but I was surviving. I still had 3 lives left, and I'm on level 10. I could do no wrong. It was incredible. So, by now, my heart is racing, and my palms are sweating, knees weak, arms spaghetti. But I've got 3 lives left, and I'm just doing awesome. And by now, some kids have noticed I'm doing really well. It was just like in the movies, I swear to God. My best buddy, Charlie Smith, is right there watching me just kill it on this game. And Lenny Lanhart, this other guy I hung around with in town. And this dude, Gene Spillman, who was always in my face, annoying kid. He's there, rooting me on. A couple of girls. It was awesome. Right? So I'm just cruising, and so all of a sudden I get killed. Boom. Dang. I've still got a couple lives left, so I can start going again, And about this time, all of a sudden there's a hand in my face waving. I'm like, what the? I just push it away. God dang Gene Spillman. Every time, But I'm getting back in the zone, and I'm starting to go, and all of a sudden the hand is back in my face again. I'm like, now I'm incensed. This jerk is he's trying to wreck my game. I'm in the zone here, right? So I just whack him hard, give him the back of my hand, and I said, get the heck out of here, you mother fudger. Only I didn't say heck, and I didn't say fudger, and it wasn't Gene Spillman. First thing that made me think maybe something was wrong is all the kids gasp. And one of my buddies says, dude, that's his mom. Sure enough, my mom came over, work, she closed up the shop, came over to the arcade to pick me up to go home. You know, she's making the snip, snip in front of my face, like, time to cut it off, you know. She actually waited until I died, and then, you know, but I wasn't dead, you know, not permanently. My sweet Norwegian mom, she's just tired, end of a long day, just wants to go home, comes over to the arcade, pick up her dang kid, and what do? I hit her and call her a mofo. I mean, I was in the zone, what can I say? She didn't understand, of course, you know. She was stunned, just shocked. She never heard me say anything like that before, much less hit her. That was worse. I'm like, whoops, sorry. Space Invaders, you know, they're coming. She says, I'll be in the car, and she marches out. So, of course, now the spell's broken. I'm out of the zone completely. It's all I can do to get through level 10 with my remaining 2 lives. Level 11 comes up and I'm toast instantly. I'm like, well, okay, better go face the music. Go back out to the car and say, Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was you. I thought it was Gene Spillman. He's been bugging me. All the time he's bugging me for no good reason. I was in the zone. I had like the best game of Space Invaders going ever. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was you. And she says, well, if that's how you talk when you play those video games, I don't think I want you going back in there. But that was the end of it. We went home. She got over it. Didn't ground me or anything. I got to go back, play video games. But I'll tell you this, I never got anywhere near level 10 on Space Invaders again. But Gene Spillman, he got what was coming to him. That's a different story. Thank you. Hey.